It's that time for us to take a look back at this week's headline-making stories in our Reporters Rewind. Our guests at the round table are South African freelance journalist Serusha Govender, veteran radio journalist Mark Riley, and also here is a Rise News contributor and political blogger Wallace Ford. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you so much.
It's good to see you. Wallace, man, you scoot on in. Come closer.
Okay.
That's right. So we have you a part of the conversation. Okay, so we have a few things to get to. I want to start off by this comment that made news, I believe, late in the day yesterday into today, and that was Mark Cuban being interviewed, I don't know by whom, but talking about bias. And he was making a valid point that we all have biases, and then he went off the rails by giving the examples of his, saying that if a person of color, a black boy in a hoodie was on the sidewalk like Trayvon Martin, that's where he really went wrong. He'd cross the street, and then he'd cross the street again if he saw a white person with a bunch of tattoos. So gosh, where do we
I don't know that he
start?
really went wrong. Jesse Jackson said this just about the same thing 15 years ago, and it was true. I mean, you know, and so it is true for Jesse Jackson's reality, certainly. And we live in a culture where black people, unfortunately, have glamorized and popularized this whole thug culture, gangster culture thing for profit. And then people are going to turn around and be shocked because some people actually buy into the notion that that's the way many black people are. I just think, you know, I'm no big fan of Mark Cuban, but this is just way beyond the pale. This is not something that we really should be focusing on some much more important concerns.
I get that, but did he go off the rail by using Trayvon Martin, who was an innocent?
I don't think he said.
He didn't say the name. He didn't say.
Well,
but that's the association that we all make.
Well, see, that's what people did. But what he's speaking to is part of the human condition. Okay, we all have things that make us nervous. I remember when I was a young man, Wallace Ford will tell you this. I get on an elevator, people get off the elevator, you know, because I was a kid. I wasn't trying.
Well, some still do, but that's another story.
But I wasn't part of any culture. It's part of the human condition. It's something that we all have in us. He just articulated in a very ham-handed way. That's all.
Well, I think this also comes after Donald Sterling made those racist remarks as well, and now people are comparing the two. And I think it's one thing to talk about bias, and it's another thing to talk about racism. It's unfortunate that these two things are both happening in the NBA, so they get equated, but it just shows that undercurrent of things that need to be talked about. And yes, that bias does exist within everyone, but perhaps he went a little bit too far, didn't feel the room as he was talking, you know, in an unbarred interview, and was very proud of that. But he does bring up a very, very important point of bias in the NBA.
Well, I'm going to be the outlier here because I just think that there's any number of black Americans who would say the exact same thing. And again, you can't popularize and glamorize gangsterism and thuggism and all of that kind of stuff in the black community and then turn around when people actually buy into it and think, rightly or wrongly, that it's part of reality.
Yeah, but there's also this issue, don't you think? You know, Mark Cuban, like it or not, he has made himself a public figure. I mean, he's a very successful, wealthy businessman, but he wants to be. He seems to go looking for the attention.
He also employs a bunch of high-profile black people.
He employs a bunch of high-profile black folk, and you know, I love my grandmother saying, "You should have known better." Isn't this a case of he should have known how to express perhaps a valid point in a much better way?
Yeah, and I mean, look, we're all human. We all, you know, don't say things all the time in a way that makes people comfortable. If he wants to say it, if that's where he's at, fine. I mean, I agree with Wallace. At some point, you have to say, okay, we're done with this. Let's move on.
You know, a lot of people say that we live in a culture that is hypersensitive. Serusha, what do you think? You know, we're always looking for what is politically correct and maligning for what is politically incorrect.
I think particularly in this instance that it is very sensitive, but I think anywhere across the world, this particular statement was just too closely resembling what happened with Trayvon Martin. It wasn't a sensitive statement. It wasn't taking into account the political and sort of tenure of the country right now. And Trayvon Martin polarized the country racially, and this is something that he should have been paying attention to. It's one thing to be someone who says something to, you know, get attention, to be that sort of a figure, but it's another thing to be insensitive to what's going on in the country.
Yeah. You know, I don't think he said this to bring attention to himself. I really don't.
No,
you mean granting an interview on television was not to bring
attention?
I
mean the statements he made. All right, the interview, he knew what he was doing there, but I don't think the statements he made were like to say, okay, well, you know, they'll pick this up and it'll go viral. I don't think he ever
It was
considered it.
insensitivity.
No, I think you're probably right. That probably never crossed his mind.
I'm just going on record. I don't think it was insensitive at all. I think he's just stating a reality, and you know, if people are offended by it, they're making conclusions and drawing connections that are really in their own mind. There's just too many people walking around with hoodies. Hoodies was around before the Trayvon Martin incident, still around now, and it's just one other thing. If it's saggy pants, would that have made the difference? I don't.
But see, that's an American construct, though.
And if he was black, if Mark Cuban was black, would we even be having this conversation?
Oh, I think we would, because again, we brought up Jesse Jackson.
But it brings up another question. In England, where there are not that many black people, hoodies have the same connotation, and they're white kids who are wearing them. You know, I mean, you talk to white people in England, in Liverpool or any of the slums in some of the other, Manchester, they'll tell you, I see a kid in a hoodie, and they're not talking about a black kid. They're just talking about a kid in a hoodie, because the hoodie is the representation.
Yeah, and it then goes back to, can you really be open and honest and transparent about any subject? Because we live in this high technology era where social media is a fact of life. Stuff gets picked up and goes viral.
Talk to your friends.
Well, you see what that got Donald Sterling.
That wasn't his friend.
That wasn't his friend, but he said it in
That
private.
was his contract employee, but that's another story.
Yeah, that's a whole other story.
All right, well, I think we burned up all our time on this one subject, but it's a provocative one. We'll probably all be talking about it over dinner throughout the weekend. Serusha Govender, Mark Riley, Wallace Ford. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Have a great weekend.
You too.
Happy holidays, Steve.